All right, board members, it's 4 o'clock, so we call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Dr. McKnight called and said that he was running a few minutes late. He'll be with us in just a few moments. In his absence, I've asked Ms. Anderson if she would lead in our invocation this afternoon.
Okay, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you this afternoon, first of all, thanking you for the many blessings that you have already bestowed upon us. We thank you for allowing us to see another day. We thank you for just lifting us up in this right spirit this afternoon, Heavenly Father. Lord, we ask now as we come together as a body to once again do your will and do your work, that you be with us, Lord. Give us the oversight, Lord. Give us the insight, Lord, and touch the hearts, Lord, for each and every one, not just the board members, but community leaders and others. And we will always work to accomplish your will, Heavenly Father. We ask that you will just continue to get our understanding into us, Lord, that we know that we have that caring heart, and the focus is on the support of our children in the Granville County Public School System. We ask these things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Dr. Houlihan, will you lead in our pledge?
Yes. Everybody please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Houlihan. Board members, thank you for taking the opportunity to come in this afternoon for our work session. We have just a few topics for us to discuss this afternoon. Madam Superintendent, are there any adjustments to our agenda?
No, sir, no adjustments.
All right. First up, we have policy item 2.01, Granville County Public Schools Retention Bonus Plan. Dr. McLean?
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Beth Day, Mr. Jamar Perry. Several districts across the state have been putting forth plans. These are retention plans for their faculty and staff, and of course, we are most appreciative of our faculty and staff, the hard work they too put forth, and we want to put forth a recommendation this evening that will, in essence, take a stab at retaining the quality staff we have as well. We have an amazing faculty and staff here in Granville County, and the team has worked to put something together for your consideration this evening. I'd like to turn it over to them at this time.
Good afternoon, board members, Dr. McLean, and members of the public. This afternoon, we are presenting to you all an employee retention bonus for members or for staff members here in Granville County Public Schools. First slide. Our proposal and rationale is listed on the screen here. Over the past year and a half, our staff worked diligently, very hard to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students. It was virtually last year, it was face-to-face last year. It was a mixture of those things, and it required all of us coming together in order to do that. This year, with coming back to school 5 full days, there have been some vacancies because of some staff shortages, not only affecting us, but affecting school districts across this state and across the country. So it's become rather stressful for a number of them, but our employees have maintained and they stood in there with us. They stood in there and held in the gap. So we know that their workloads have increased. They've been looking out for each other because of the absence of some substitutes on some days. So we've had some teachers to cover some classrooms because of that. It's been a very highly competitive labor market. Districts are offering very large sign-on bonuses, but our employees are remaining with us. We have not had a large number, and we hope they'll continue to stay with us to leave and go across lines to larger districts because of maybe higher supplements or other competitive offers that may be in other fields of employment. This year we've had a number of high vacancies. Looking back a year and a half ago, we were looking at vacancies at the single digits at one point. It got down to maybe 8. This year we're looking at 35 plus at different points in the year. So it has been a very challenging year, but our employees have stood in there and maintained that. A large number of our employees have maintained and stayed there with us. So we looking at different funding sources when we came up with this proposal. So we looked at the ESSER funds, which are those federal funds that have been issued down from the federal government, and this is an allowable expense to be able to provide a retention bonus to our employees. We looked at different categories and classifications of employees, and I'll go through each of those in just a few minutes along with our other members of our staff. But this bonus will be paid Friday, January 14th, 2022. That is a separate day than our normal traditional supplement period. And for anyone who's worked in public education for a long time, you know that last check in December into that first check in January, it feels like about 40 weeks. It's a long period of time. So this would, if approved, would kind of provide an extra for our employees as they get through that winter period. Next slide. So for permanent full-time employees, we're proposing a $1,000 gross payment to all permanent full-time employees. Now, because this is a retention bonus, these employees must maintain their employment with the school system for the remainder of the school year. So that's very important. Now, we do know that if they decide to separate at any point, they would be responsible for repaying that retention bonus back. Now, in this proposal, we are including that the executive team be excluded from this proposal. So this would be for all employees who are permanent full-time, with the exception of the executive team members. So next slide, please. For our permanent part-time employees, we are recommending a $600 one-time gross payment, and with them as well, it would be a retention bonus. They must maintain employment for the remainder of the school year. For those of them who do decide to separate prior to the last working day of the school year, they would need to repay that retention bonus. At this time, I'll turn over to Mr. Graham, who will provide information about an additional bonus regarding bus drivers.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I want to take a minute to just brag on our bus drivers. They have remained with us, just as Mr. Perry mentioned about our teachers. Our bus drivers have remained with us while surrounding districts have really struggled to get the kids to school and back home. We are short just really a handful of drivers, and we've had quite a few sign up for training to get their licenses, and they will be in our pipeline, so we should be in much better shape, going forward. But I just want to say that we're really appreciative of the work that our drivers have done. Compared to surrounding districts, we are just very appreciative of the work they've done. So what I want to do is make sure that I am clear that our drivers are receiving an additional bonus. So if you are a custodian, you will receive your bonus that Mr. Perry already referenced as either as a permanent employee, and then because you drive a bus, there's an additional $250 if you drive a morning route, another $250 if you also drive an evening route, and those drivers who drive additional routes, because we have several drivers who do, they'll drive their full time and then they'll do another route on top of that. So I just want to be clear that everybody understands, for our drivers, this is on top of what you would already be receiving as an employee of the district. Okay?
Just going to circle back to the qualifications on receiving the bonus. You must be in permanent pay status as of November 1st of this current school year and remain employed. Now, tentatively, our last working day is scheduled for June 9th, 2022. Weather permitting, that we do have to add any days to the end of the year, but that would be the last working day for this current school year. All employees who opt in to participate in this retention bonus would need to complete a quick survey to say that yes, they understand the conditions of this. Otherwise, they would need to pay back the bonus. So we would have a sort of an opt-in to participate.
As Mr. Perry mentioned, this is with the ESSER federal funds. So it's really important what our process is associated with these payments. So the Finance Department would work in conjunction with Human Resources to determine the eligible full-time and part-time employees according to the parameters of this plan, as well as we would work with transportation on who are those drivers that are driving those morning, afternoon routes and the double routes. And then there would be checks and balances between the departments to ensure that we had everyone, as well as we would pull a list of employees that we have, but then we're going to balance that, check that against those opt-in forms to ensure that everyone has completed an opt-in form that would receive this bonus. Next slide. So you might be thinking, how much is this going to cost? So with our, again, this is the federal ESSER funds that have been received. The plan is subject to approval by the Department of Public Instruction on our ESSER plan. So our estimated projected cost is for our full-time employees, 830 employees, 1.1 million. I just want to point out right here, as far as full-time, Mr. Perry said, that includes all of our full-time employees, but does not include the executive team, which includes Dr. McLean, Dr. Winborn, Mr. Perry, myself, and Mr. Graham. 64 part-time employees, a cost of $41,500. Bus drivers, 81, a cost of $46,000, so a total cost of $1.1 million out of the federal funds. I will mention these costs include the projection of what the retirement would cost. We are still working with the retirement system to determine whether it will be subject to retirement or not. And that's right at $180,000 is the retirement cost of this. So that would make a difference in that total cost, but it would be less than what we're projecting if it's not subject to retirement. So, next slide, please. So the executive team's recommendation is to approve a one-time retention bonus for eligible Granville County Public Schools employees as presented using ESSER funds.
That's it. This is our recommendation, Mr. Chair.
All right, board members, you have questions before we take action on this? Okay, you've heard the recommendation of the, yes, sir.
Tim, I have a question, I just needed to remember what it was. Oh, the question on the bus drivers. I understand that there are drivers in school now that's gonna start after this starts November 1st, right? So will they be prorated or will they just be out of it?
Those who start after November 1, would you like to address that for us?
Some of those who are in the class, Mr. Peace, are current employees, so they may be dual employees, so they have to complete their process because they, as presented, they would have to have routes. So those individuals at this point will not have route, but if they are maybe, for example, a teacher assistant or custodian, they would receive the first bonus, first portion of that bonus, which is $1,000 if they're full-time.
So they wouldn't receive the last one?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, board members? All right, this comes to you as a recommendation from the staff to approve this as presented using ESSER funds. What would be the pleasure of the board?
I make the motion that we do approve this as presented.
All right, have a second. All right, what discussion do you have? Obviously, this will go, I hope it'll go a long way to show our staff that we are thankful for what they do. Any other discussion or comments? All right, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries 7-0. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Our next item is 2.02, the redrawing of voter districts. This is a follow-up to the meeting that was held jointly with the commissioners last Monday. And Dr. McLean?
Yes, thank you so very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Houlihan for attending and leading that meeting on our behalf. I was out of town. Thank you so much for taking care of that meeting and our other board members who were present there. This is a resolution presented to our board. Two separate boards are meeting from my understanding about these maps. So at this time, we have the resolution for adopting the maps. Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Chair?
No, ma'am. So you've had the opportunity to read this resolution. This was provided to you in board docs. This is from the work that you completed last Monday with the commissioners. Do you have any questions regarding this resolution or the process or anything that maybe the attorney can address?
I will just share that the commissioners have the same
All right. So you have this in front of you as an action item. The commissioners are doing their part of their action later on today. And so what would be the pleasure of the board?
Motion to approve is presented.
All right, we have a motion to approve the resolution as presented by Dr. McKnight. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second by Ms. LeBrecq. Do we have further discussion? All right, seeing none, if you're ready to vote. All those in favor of approving the motion to approve the resolution for adopting maps, redrawing our voter districts, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The resolution passes 7-0. Thank you, Madam Attorney. All right, and our next item is 2.03. We've asked the staff to give us an update for the Granville County Public Schools High School Consolidation Draft Timeline. Madam Superintendent?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. After our board took action at our last meeting, our team got busy with our side of the work. And this afternoon, we have for you an update of our timeline. Prior to that, is there anything you'd like to have done before we present our timeline?
So we will restate kind of the action that we had in the presentation. So, all right, so I think that's all.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good afternoon. This afternoon, Mr. Graham and I will present just a few slides, what we see as a general overview and timeline of the high school consolidation process. So just to see a quick overview, I'm going to cover, just for a matter of public record, what the previous board action that was taken and some possible additional future board action that's needed. And then Mr. Graham is going to check off a few of the administrative actions that will need to be done in the coming months. And then we'll both just go over a few final notes. So the formal study is titled here, A Study of the Proposed Closure of Granville Central High School, an analysis of the relocation of G.C. Hawley Middle School or South Granville High School to that campus. And that was commissioned on May 3rd of 2021. The members of the administrative team presented that to the board in open session on May 17th, 2021, and various comments and edits and suggested items were added, and they were brought back for a second final draft, which was presented to you also in open session on June 7th, 2021. Following the completion of that study, we did hold a public forum at Tar River Elementary School. That was held on the evening of July 27th. Just worth noting that multiple citizens did come out to speak in person regarding this particular study. We also had members of the public which completed electronic public comment form regarding this study, and all of that information was provided to our board as well. And then there were additional public comments made about this study at subsequent other Board of Education meetings, kind of mixed in with public comment as well. After all of that was completed, the board on November 1st, 2021, there was a motion that was approved 5-2, which read right here specifically, move South Granville High School to Granville Central High School and consolidate the two, and move G.C. Hawley Middle School to the South Granville High School campus, giving the high school a new identity. And it's just worth noting that this vote, of course, was made in a public meeting, an open meeting. No votes about any of this were held in closed session. So it was all done in open session. One item, because of the part of the motion, the last little clause there, which reads giving the high school a new identity, that the board may need to consider as future action is the potential naming of facilities. Per board policy, that authority lies with you as a board. So for the current South Granville High School campus, you would need to consider whether you would keep the Holly name or rename it. And then for the current Granville Central High School campus, which will become will stay a high school, would you keep the South Granville High School name or rename it? And that's just something for your consideration, as that wasn't specified in the motion. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Graham, who can talk about the future tasks, all of which lie, of course, with the administrative team.
Thank you, Dr. Winborn. Of course, one of the things that happened immediately was the maintenance crew started doing surveys physically of the buildings to do an inventory of buildings and so forth, and so that was ongoing. But aside from that, the first thing we did was get in touch with ITRA at NC State, and the representatives there talked to Dr. Winborn and I about, the steps that they could take to help us with drawing the attendance zone lines. There are two suggestions that they gave us. The first is to complete a full land use study, and the time that it would take to complete that would push out that delivery until June of 2022. That would involve, interviewing developers and making a more in-depth study of the potential growth of the whole county. Another consideration is to take the existing data that we have in Power School and using TIMS to create new attendance zones. That's something they could do, with that would not involve a consideration of future growth necessarily, and it would just use the data that we have, and that could be delivered to us in March. The more time-consuming effort would result in possibly a little bit more accurate and reliable, complete picture for us, but either one of those two is a possibility. Keep in mind that because of the changes that are being proposed, school choice options for high schoolers will be limited a little bit because there will be less freed up space in the two high schools. Dr. Winborn. Next, we need to take a look at the staffing reassignments and transfers, and Mr. Perry has already considered that, and we will look at the attendance zone and what that data looks like in terms of numbers, the ADM. The staffing will follow the students, and they'll be allocated by department, and there will be program areas will remain intact, particularly thinking things like CTE, for example. There's a concern there. Those will be continued, and we need to consider one of the major considerations is determining the leadership of the schools who will lead these efforts, because they will play an integral role in making a lot of the decisions going forward. So leadership and their support staff need to be determined. The staff will have a say. We will have a survey for them, and they may elect at that time to make a decision to move on. I have been through this process myself in Durham many, many years ago, and when something like this happens, you do reconsider what your options are, and you might want to make a choice, to go somewhere else. So there's a voluntary element involved with that for the staff. They have a say. Next slide. A more strict timeline that we have to deal with is student registration. That's something that's already in place. The high school bulletin is developed as early as this January. Trainings and Power School preparation occurs in February. Dr. Winborn has already met with Lori Ward to discuss this process and what does it look like going forward. These are pretty well set dates, so there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of changing them. The key here is when student registration begins. That begins in March. So the high schoolers take a look at the programs available and develop their schedules with their counselors, and they actually signed up for their courses in March. Usually the registration is over at the end of April. Then the master schedules are created by the staffs at the high schools, and the students can receive their schedules at the end of May or June. And then we can then make additional changes to the staff based on student registration. So just looking at this, I will just let you know that that's a pretty robust timeline, to try to have things ready for students, if they're going to follow that timeline, that we need to have our things in place, the buildings need to be ready and so forth, and our staff. Next slide. So the area where I'm more directly concerned is this area of facility preparation. And as I said, Mr. Clement has already taken some of his staff to begin assessing, what are we talking about here? For example, a good portion of JF Webb is currently not being used as class, a lot of the classrooms are empty or they're being used as storage. So all the material that's being stored has to be relocated somewhere else. Those classrooms need to be prepared to be used as classrooms for next year. So we need, put a lot of thought into that. There's a lot of, maybe there's some repairs, maybe there's some just painting or just, waxing the floors and so forth. But that all has to be done. We will use the master facility plan, which outlines a 5-year progression of what work needs to be done in order to assess, what's a priority and needs to be addressed sooner. Additionally, we have to plan the movement of furniture and materials. And, I know Dr. Winborn was involved with that when this facility, when Mary Potter ceased being a functioning middle school and transitioned to the current Mary Potter Center for Education. A lot of the material that was here followed students maybe where they to Northern Granville, or it was housed somewhere else. But it was a pretty significant, sort of task that the maintenance folks had to undertake. Additionally, it's a time for repairs and upgrades. And, as some of you did a tour a little while ago, Webb was one of the schools you visited, and I think that it was pointed out to you some of the things that might need to be done at that school. So you can see that, again, that's something that's going to have to be ramped up and done sooner. I want to make a note that most of this would have to be done with outside contractors. A lot of the maintenance crew will be busy doing maintenance for the remainder of the district because all our other schools have to prepare for the opening of school in the fall. So our folks will be tied up with that endeavor, and they won't be available to work on this for these two schools. So we'll have to use outside contractors. Dr. Winborn.
So thank you, Mr. Graham. Just a couple of other considerations, things to keep in mind. The priority, of course, is going to be making sure that we open up the 2022-23 school year smoothly for the schools that are impacted, the two high schools and Hawley, which will be moving. So really, we're going to have to sort of put a pin in what happens at the Hawley campus until after we open up school next year. We really won't be spending much time at all attending to the needs of that campus. Instead, we'll be focusing on those campuses where our students will be. So we'll have to circle back and then have conversations about what needs to be done there and how that facility is going to be used. But the priority will be moving forward, getting everything ready for school. As Mr. Graham said, contracted services will definitely be used, and it is important to note that that was included in the financial analysis in the studies. We had budgeted and included dollar amounts there. For example, we'll have to hire movers. I know when we moved Toller and Mary Potter, we hired 2 different companies to assist with that. And it was just an incredible amount of stuff that needed to be moved. So as Mr. Graham said, to follow the children. Of course, we're going to have to prioritize our needs over our wants during this compressed timeline. We may not get to every single pretty thing that needs to be done, but we're going to make sure that what has to be done is done first. And then, as Dr. McLean said earlier publicly, the stakeholder input is going to be critical to this process. We're going to need to get our students, our parents, our community members involved in the conversations about the types of programs that we're going to have at these campuses, different facility needs, A to Z on how these schools are going to open up and how they're going to operate in the coming years. So their voice is going to be critical to this, and I imagine that we'll be seeing a lot of different task forces, committees, and groups like that coming together and assisting us with this work. So that concludes our presentation. We're happy to try to take any questions, and I can jump back to any slides you want to reference.
Board members, you've seen the information. What questions do you have? Ms. Williams?
I'm not going to try to rehash the last meeting, but we've received a lot of emails. We've received a lot of information from the community, and there are a lot of people that feel like they really weren't aware of what was going on. And that's concerned me. I've lost sleep over it. And it's hard to get people behind something if they feel blindsided. And it occurred to me that why did they feel blindsided? Well, let's go back to Joe Tola. Joe Tola people, from the time the vote was taken till they had their public hearing, they had almost 30 days. A big article appeared in the paper a couple of days afterwards, and several other notices were given or referred to. People wrote in a letter to the editor and that type of thing. So they had a lot of time to express themselves and their concerns. And there are a lot of concerns that are arising that I really hadn't even thought about. So I really feel like we need to have a hearing for the people that are affected by the South Granville situation. I think it's only right. These people have supported our community for years, and they feel like they want to be heard. The economic factors as well. When we did the vote to do the studies, the elementary and secondary studies, we did that, I believe, on the 20th of July. Is that right? I think that's right. And I'm sorry to say I voted this way, but we voted to have the hearings the following week. I was out of town. I did watch them online, 26th and 27th. Now, I went to the library this weekend, and I couldn't find anywhere in either newspaper, and it may have been there, but I looked, and I could not find anything that notified anybody that that hearing was going to happen. Now, we're in the summertime. We've got all these people on vacation. Parents are not looking at websites for schools, at least I wouldn't be. Facebooks, maybe. And I just don't feel like they got the notice that they needed on that. And I think they deserve that. And whether it makes any difference in the decision after we hear from them, that's not my place to say. But I think we owe that to the community. I'd like to ask Ms. Dubison some questions, if that's okay. I'd just like to know the general statute you used to, we used to make this process go forward on the public hearing.
Well, you mean the statute that requires a public hearing?
Yeah, and notice.
The statute is 115C-72.
116,
115C-72
okay.
is the statute regarding consolidation and closure of schools, and says that before there is such a decision that a public hearing must be held. It doesn't specify any particular amount of notice, and so we default to the open meetings law, which requires at least 48 hours public notice before a special meeting of any sort.
Now, I read in the, if I'm correct, in the UNC government school thingy that we have access to, that a board can set its own procedures. Is that correct?
Sure, as long as they are not lower than the open meetings law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, should have done this before. I just copied this off today. See if I can get it. In our policy manual in board docs, there's a policy code called Policy Code 2320, Compliance with the Open Meetings Law. And it goes on to talk about them. And it talks about notice. And it goes on to say about regular meetings, about the schedule, so forth, and then the special meetings that you're referring to, correct? 48 hours. Then it has the emergency meetings. Then it has recess meetings where you can continue a meeting. And then the last one, E, has public hearings. And it says, notice of a public hearing will be given at least 2 weeks in advance of the date of the hearing, or as otherwise required by law, and will state the time, place, and purpose of the public hearing. Such notice will be posted on the meetings, on the board bulletin board, mailed or delivered to each person who has submitted a request or notice for special meetings, and provided in such a way or ways as may be legally required for the hearing. So I don't know, if we're not going to follow our own policy, I'm a little bit upset about that.
The board did approve the schedule of events to take place after that. When we came back and discussed that public hearing, the board was aware that how the compressed timeline would be.
We were aware of a compressed timeline, but I don't remember anybody reading our policy. So if we don't use it, I don't know what's the point of having it. That's just my opinion.
Do you want to make a motion based off of what you're asking, or did you just want to make a statement?
Well, I'm making a statement, but, I haven't seen anybody bring up this policy that we were deviating from the policy. Did anyone bring that up? Because I don't remember it.
And I don't recall, I don't recall the timing, and you may be right. I do recall that there was a schedule of public hearings that was put out early in the summer as awaiting your decision about which hearing would be for which.
There was no date set, though,
Okay.
until the
I may be
20th.
misremembering. I recall that
I've
there
been
was a
through board
schedule.
docs. There was no date set.
Okay.
So that's just my thinking. I think we owe it to the people, and I think in our policy, we say we're going to give 2 weeks. And if we have a policy that says 2 weeks, that seems reasonable.
Okay, so do you want to make a motion that we?
Yes, I'll make a motion that we have a public hearing for this study. And I'd also like to add that in that public hearing notice that we be very specific about the schools that are affected as opposed to just saying secondary studies.
Would you like to suggest a date?
No.
Ma'am?
I would say that my feeling is that you have your public hearing, you look at what the Butner-Creemore News newspaper date is, and when you can get your notice in, and 2 weeks from that date or after would be appropriate.
Stan, can you advise to their publication schedule? I know Ms. Dixon's here.
So we need by tomorrow noon in order to be able to get it in this week.
Okay, so that would look at the 30th would be the date. 2 weeks from that. Is that-
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, ma'am.
You said a public hearing in the motion, a public hearing for this study, meaning,
Well, the study's got basically 3 different things in it, and I
Right.
think that's part of the confusion to the public, to be honest.
but the secondary study that was done, you want a public hearing on all of the options that are in that?
We tabled the studies that were on the 26th that we did not vote. We tabled those. So I think this is the one that we need to have.
Okay. I just want to make sure the motion's clear in the minutes as to what the hearing is about.
Ms. Jerry?
Hold
Go
on
ahead. You wanna
hold
go
on
ahead,
one
you
second,
go
let me
ahead.
make sure I've got the motion correct. So, Ms. Williams, am I understanding that you're calling for a public hearing related to the 3 schools that are named in this
Well, I
study?
don't know unless you want to separate this study out.
Well, it's your motion.
It's your motion.
Well, I would say the whole study.
Okay, so the 3 schools.
Mhm.
For the earliest we could do it would be November 30th. Is that a correct motion?
That would be fine.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second to have a public hearing based on the secondary study involving Granville Central, GC Hawley, and South Granville High School, no earlier than November 30th. Do we have a second?
I will second it, and then we'll have discussion, correct?
Yes, sir. All right. Do you want to speak to your motion anymore, or do you want to allow him the floor? Dr. Houlihan?
Would we go back and just explain, are we going to focus on Granville Central and the possibility as one option of going to South Granville? Are we going to talk solely about South Granville and the option of going to Granville Central?
It sounds like, according to her, that we would discuss all three schools.
Including Hawley?
Yes, sir, because that's
And
part of
so
the
that
study.
would be the possibility of them going to South Granville?
Either South Granville or Central.
Or
The
Central.
study was to move Holly to either South Granville or Central and to close one or the other, like, move the schools.
All right, so if the study was Hawley to either one of those two schools, correct? Well, that's not what we did.
Well, the study was the closure of that campus and moving either one of those schools to that campus.
That's not what she just said, I don't think.
Who, me?
You. Now, repeat that if
Okay,
you would,
maybe
I
I
misunderstood.
Maybe I misspoke. The study was to close Granville Central and then move, help me out.
Hawley or South Granville to that campus.
Right,
And then the
So-
vice versa would happen to the other school.
exactly. So Holly would end up on one of those campuses, was my understanding.
Okay, does that, okay, that's,
And
So-
that's what we did in that motion,
Yeah.
was that we moved.
but we at one time talked about sending the 7th and 8th graders from Hawley to South Granville. And I believe, unless I'm completely wrong, did we not?
We talked about it, but
Yeah.
there was no motion.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But, so would that be a part of this discussion as well? And why not?
Because she said the motion was to have it on this, a hearing on the study that was done.
Yeah, we didn't study the 7th and 8th grade
Okay.
piece of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
the confusion as I see it is that the motion that's on the screen is not all of the motion that was made. Because according to what the confusion or the concern is about, is the way I see it from the people in the community, is that there was an option, the way they understood it. That when you made the motion, it eliminated all the options except moving Granville Central, South Granville to Granville Central. So I think that was confusion because in the original motion, you could do either one.
Yeah, but the action had to come from the board, and that was part of the motion.
I understand that. I'm talking about the confusion that, based on some of the information that I got from the community, is that they were blindsided because they weren't sure what was going to happen. And when it happened, of course, they wouldn't expect, well, I don't know what they expected really, but based on what I'm hearing, they didn't expect South Granville to be closed for high school. And I mean, I don't know how you could have, or we could word it any differently, but it's certainly causing a lot of confusion from some of the people in the community. And the ones that speaks the loudest gets all the.
Well, and I think by having this public hearing that Ms. Williams is proposing, I mean, possibly that could be the opportunity. I mean, it would be the opportunity for them to voice their concern. In traditionally public hearings, we have not responded back in those meetings to address that confusion. But that would give us the opportunity to hear their concerns, is I think what she's proposing.
I understand. You know, is the fact that the motion that Ms. Williams made talks about 3 studies. And we've already decided on one. And that's to move the South Granville to Granville Central. I think that's the concern, because before, there was a choice between moving it, or moving Central to Granville Central, really. South Granville, that is. I mean, I'm just trying to understand that what's gonna happen during a public hearing when we have people coming, talking about, 3 choices that they might think they still have, when the bottom line
Is it
They don't really have
possible,
any.
is it possible to just have a public hearing on one? It's included in the study, but it's,
Sure. You
okay.
have a public hearing on like, on which? But they seem connected though. If you close one high school, you are gonna consolidate it with the other one.
but the message is that we are going to close South Granville as an high school. I mean, that's what we're doing. That's what we said we're gonna do.
So the decision was to move South Granville? Yes.
Right. So if people, or if I say you want to close it for, as in high school, isn't it the same thing as moving? I mean, basically, because it's gonna no longer be in high school if you're gonna move Holiday.
That building will no longer
That's
have a
what-
high school,
yeah.
yes.
But the actual school itself still exists unless we check. I mean, in the motion, it talks about renaming it.
I mean, that's the next step. We haven't gotten there yet.
I'll be happy to amend the motion to just have the public hearing on moving the,
Well, just
Granville
to make a little bit of clarification though, just, so I think where we're having the confusion is, from what I understand back in the summer when we talked about it, when you talk about a school closure, you're talking about the number that is assigned to that school, right? So each school has its own designated number. And so whenever we went through the wording of this Granville Central High School, can you go back to that, the study, the name of the study? Thank you. The name of the school, it seems, is moot, just for the study purposes, because what you're doing is you're proposing the closure of South Granville, which in effect what you're doing is you're closing the number that is associated with Granville Central High School, and would be moving the number that is associated with South Granville High School to that facility or GC Holly's number. You know what I mean? So I think that's where there's confusion, is because we're talking about renaming and doing all of this stuff, which is what the community thinks about, but from an actual like closure study, it's my understanding that it's a number, that school, we're deciding which school's number is going to be closed, not, you know, which school is going to be moved where and all that kind of stuff, which is why there's confusion and flexibility and leeway that is misleading, can be misleading.
So is it fair to say that basically you just want to rehab the secondary public hearing again to give more notice? And from that, we will take in the comments from the public, and either the decision stands or the board decides to do something different. Is that kind of the intention?
pretty much.
Okay. Is there other discussion or questions?
I
Yes,
just want to, yes, thank you. Because I've, been listening intently on everything that was being said, has been said. And I'm just reading that word for word about the previous action in the formal study. Let's just look at that. It says, a study of the proposed closure of Granville Central High School. Granville Central High School. And the analysis of the relocation of Holly Middle, or South Granville School to that campus. Now, it says relocation, okay, so we're going to say just word for word, the closure of Granville Central and the relocation of South Granville to that. So really what we're saying now is the relocation of South Granville to the Granville Central,
Yes, ma'am.
and not
No.
having Granville Central as a high school. So the closure, I'm just reading the words, the closure of Granville Central High. It's the consolidation, right?
So
I
we-
mean, I don't say anything about closure when it's really the consolidation.
Well, I think where the crutch may be
Right.
is the end of the motion that was made was renaming the school.
Okay, okay. Yeah, word for word, it's sort
Yeah,
of, you
the
know,
study itself, word for word.
right,
Is exactly what was
Right.
proposed, just there was that last caveat.
that last count.
And the statute speaks of closure or consolidation, because
Okay.
anytime you close a school, you're also consolidating the students with another school. So, you know, because the students don't cease to exist. So
Right.
any closure necessitates a reassignment.
Understand?
But I do understand that the words have
Yeah.
become a sticking point.
Now, Gladys is asking, Board Member Williams is asking, and I just want to make sure we don't have to go back and relook again if we get back into public hearings or whatever, or get back into something else with regards to other things that we have been working as well, such as redistricting. What impact is that
So
with,
the redistricting that we did with commissioners or the redrawing of attendance lines?
well,
Because I
that's,
think there's some confusion in the public about that.
yes.
They're two totally separate issues.
Any impacts on a decision that we've been discussing,
Not from
redistricting?
Not from changing the voting districts.
Okay.
I mean, that's finished.
Yeah,
And then the other word that you all use, rezoning,
Reassignment.
yeah.
So redrawing school attendance lines.
okay? And did we do that when we looked at it before? You said reassignment of students and the lines, be it impacts JF Webb because of this consolidation, or, you know, depending on either one will impact because of the location of the two. More so impact the other school, whichever.
Yeah, and
decides
that's
to go.
what Mr. Graham had brought to us, was NC State would help
Right.
us with that.
Right,
So any movement further back, then yes, it does kind of impact the timeline a little bit. However, we also as a board need to decide, do we do the big long study till June or the study in March? So we could ask the staff to bring back both draft timelines at our next board meeting while this public hearing is going on. And we're technically not spending money at that point if you're bringing us back a draft timeline for us to decide which one to use besides the staff time. Is that correct?
We can do that. We do need to get the mass for the state.
Yeah.
We'll get the bottom of it, Leslie. June's gonna tell them.
The group that's working on the reassignment district lines, how far along are they?
We've not engaged them yet
Okay.
because the board needs to give direction to staff. But one thing the superintendent just said, the longer we wait, there are other
Understand
districts that
that.
have this going on too.
Understand
And the
that.
staff has contacted them and asked for an
Okay.
estimate.
All right, so on the floor, we have the motion currently to have another public hearing based on basically to have the secondary school public hearing again, no earlier than November 30th. That motion was made by Ms. Williams and seconded by Dr. Houlihan. Is there any other comments or questions before we vote?
I guess I would be curious to know from the public, if we were to do a public hearing, if they are opposed, like, if they are opposed to South Granville being moved altogether, like if we were to literally pick up South Granville High School and say, okay, your new location is at the GC Hawley address, right, identity and all that stuff, or if it's that they're opposed to the merging of the two altogether. I guess is like, just if we were to do a public hearing, I would be curious to know, like, if it's truly that they want South Granville intact in the location that it's at, no changes, nothing, whatever, or if they want it, like, if they're okay with it being still South Granville, but at a new address kind of thing. You know, I'm just curious.
All right, board members, any other questions or comments? All right, if you're ready to vote, we'll do a roll call vote. So again, the motion is that we have another secondary school public hearing no earlier than November 30th. Ms. Anderson, how do you vote?
Yes to her motion.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Dr. McKnight?
Yes.
Mr. Peace?
Yes.
Ms. LeBrecq?
Yes.
And Dr. Houlihan?
Yes.
I vote yes, so the motion is 7-0. It passes. We will hold another secondary public hearing. What we need to decide at this point is when we will do that. So if everybody can get out their calendars,
Has to be done by the 30th, right?
well, no earlier than November 30th.
No earlier.
Staff, do you have or Dr. McLean, do you have a recommendation of a date that works for you or staff?
The 30th on a Tuesday, I believe.
It is, yes, ma'am. Would the evening of the 30th work for the board?
Yep.
Is that sounding like a yes? Okay.
Works for me.
All right, my next question will be is where do you want to hold it? We have traditionally been holding these at Tar River because of the setup. Is that okay, or is there somewhere else you want to hold it? Ms. Williams, do you have a preference since you brought it up?
Not really, other than, what is South Granville, is any problem holding it there?
So we can hold it there. We did run into a few technical issues when we were there before, but, I mean, if people are willing to deal with that, then if staff would, is that okay with the staff, you think, Dr. McLean? I think they both stepped out.
Mr. Ernie? In terms of technology at South Granville for November 30th, is the tech team comfortable?
Okay. All right. Would that be okay, Mrs. Williams?
That's fine.
All right, rest of the board. So that'll be, we typically do those at 6 p.m. And so November 30th at 6 p.m. South Granville, we will have another secondary school public hearing. We'll work with our public information officer to get that information out tonight so that there is enough lead time, and we'll advertise that across our platforms. All right. Is there any further action that needs to come with that timeline, or?
We can take care of that. We'll take care of it.
Okay. All right. Board members, any other comments, questions, concerns, actions? Yes, ma'am.
This is not related, well, sort of related directly, but I think would be maybe good for us to take a look at that board policy and be a little bit more specific as far as what we consider notice, as far as newspaper, how we want to do it. And I think that might be a good idea.
Okay. So what we'll do is submit that. Dr. McLean, can you get with the attorney and see if there are any kind of recommendations on how we can revise that a little clearer?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Thank
We'll do
you.
that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I've got a few questions.
Yes, sir.
First of all, do we have a round figure about the cost of what the timeline entails and any other soft money costs going forward?
We are waiting on a proposal from NC State. We can tell you what it cost the last time,
we use the same group. Dr. Winborn, what was that figure? This is the same group from the last time, about 3 or 4 years ago?
So ITRA charged us almost $30,000, but that was for the IPSAC study. That's an acronym, IPSAC. And that's sort of, when they went around and interviewed all the developers in the planning departments and municipalities, so they got a real clear idea of the projections of growth. That was done 3.5 years, 4 years ago now, actually.
When I first arrived.
Yeah, when you first arrived, Dr. McLean. But what they're proposing, the lesser of the two choices, is much less comprehensive. So we haven't seen a quote yet, but surely it'll be less than that.
What other expenses would we have besides that?
I think we really have to listen to Mr. Graham when he says contracting movers.
Right.
For furniture, upgrades to the facilities, rooms that have not been used in a long time will now be used. So the painting, furniture, moving, things of that nature. We had to do a lot of that when we transformed this facility from a school building to office space. So contracts like that come to mind just easily.
Did you say upgrades? What?
I don't know that upgrades would be the appropriate word, but preparation for classroom space. Because right now, some of those rooms, I think, are storage space or maybe some teacher meeting spaces, but they wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for teaching classrooms. So we know some of that will have to be done. Is there anything?
In that study, there were some figures about some of the rebranding and those kind of items that was specifically pulled out.
I'm talking about what expenses now versus a year ago, or roughly a year ago. Not, what are expenses that would be nice to know?
Oh, yeah.
And where would the money come from
That's right.
to pay for them, as we did when we looked at Tar River? Where is the money coming from? And it would be very interesting to know what that would be. And I think the other thing would be interesting, what kind of, you used the term upgrade, what kind of facility costs would we have to address at both Granville Central and at at Hawley, well, whatever it's going to be called then. What other kinds of expenses? For example, the figure $3 million has been thrown around to create an auditorium that is larger than 350 students. Now, that may or may not be, I'm just using that as an example. Is there going to be a track? Those kind of things that need to be considered, or at least need to be brought to us as possibilities, so that we don't go into this not knowing what the possible expenses could be. Yes, we know we don't know it at this point, but within the next year, what would be necessary when we went to Granville Central in terms of athletic facilities and so on and so forth. And the reason I say that is, if it was important to do that at Tar River, it seems it should be just as fair to know those figures, or to have the projections that we did in a similar way, because one of the number one reasons that Tar River was rejected as a possibility, one of the reasons, was cost. And I remember, Ms. Chair, when at one of our first couple of meetings, when I brought that up, your immediate comment was, where are we going to get the money? So I think that's really an important thing that we know. How would we get that information? The public needs to know that more than anything.
I think we decide what options we want to ask the staff to get numbers on. It was cut and dry on what we had an architectural study to tell us what it costs for Tar River for Granville Central to move over, we need to decide, I guess, maybe in ordinance of importance, which ones we need right now.
Do you see though that,
Oh, I completely understand, but I also
I mean, it
know,
was clear that obviously some of the board members did not want to do that, and I understand that. But we need to treat every situation fairly. And this is an example where we have not. I'm not being critical of
we didn't
you
do
as
this,
much as the process.
we didn't use this we didn't treat it fairly from the last process we did either.
I don't understand what you mean.
Because when we closed Toller, it was strictly on class size and the amount of money being put into a building. We didn't use that because every time we brought that up, we had to look at unintended consequences and
Okay,
other.
then what you're saying is we shouldn't have done that at Tar River.
No, I'm just making a comment. So, I mean, as a board, do we decide what options we want to have at Granville Central to have them to go look for? Because if not, I mean, they could come up with all kinds of extra things that we decide we don't want.
Well,
Hadn't had a track for 14 years, so it's sort of, I think we need to figure out what we say a high school should have and work in that direction, whether it be Webb, South Granville, or Granville Central.
well, my concern is, besides that, is that we're going to put these two schools together, which is, a decision the board makes. Nice facility, lots of new opportunities because of electives, because of size, and all those kind of things. I'm sure we'll build a track, which is fine. But the bottom line is that Webb is going to become second again. The facilities are the third highest needs in the county. We're not going to be able to offer the same kind of electives and opportunities at JF Webb because we won't have the money, because we won't have the positions. And, I feel, when I thought about it, a few days later, it just seems like we don't look at the whole county and the implications of one thing that's done here to the rest of the county, if any. And I just struggle that, sure, I represent a lot of folks at JF Webb, but it just seems like, I'm going to say, well, I won't say it. It just seems like it's just unequal.
Well, I would say two things is, the first one is I don't think we can say that they wouldn't get the same opportunities at JF Webb because of positions, because when we redistrict, we're going to fill that building back up. And so you get positions based on those teachers. Second, Mr. Peace has said it over and over and over. We go to the commissioners and ask. Commissioners told us they weren't going to give us the money for Tar River. So we ask now, let's see what they're going to do now, because they talked about giving upgrade money for the high schools. So most we can do is ask. We've got a meeting with them Friday. Let's make that the first thing we ask them.
So we pass the motion and we do this, then we go and ask them, and if they
Well,
don't
how many
fund
times
it,
have we asked them and they've come back on things before? So,
well,
we
I think-
waited for a
I w- I
solid
w-
answer for that, then we wouldn't have made a decision, which,
Well, I hope you appreciate the rate that me raising that, because that, no matter what the commissioners do or don't do, no one thought about that when we made that motion.
I disagree
Oh,
with that.
David, come on. You thought about what was going to happen to Webb when this thing was passed.
Yeah, Webb was going to fill back up.
That remains to be seen if it's a school of choice. We don't know how that's going to go yet. And it may, certainly would increase some, I would think. We just don't really know.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
can we, well, I'll move on whether y'all not do it or not. The question that I have that has to do with, number one, is how will the decision that we just made affect the timeline that the administration might have in place as to moving forward? I don't think it will, but it might. I'm not sure. And the other thing that I would say has to do with the cost. Because anytime, I mean, you guys, the administration have to make the decisions that's going to cause for a smooth transition when we do this. So as they make those decisions, they have to associate a cost with whatever they decide we need to do. Now, they're going to bring that back to us, but as a board, I don't see us deciding what we need to do within that school, in those schools, in order for it to work. So for us to talk about what they are going to have to do, I don't want us to tie their hands. I want them to do what's best for children as we go through this process. So I can't honestly say at today's time that they know what they're going to have to do. I don't think it's been enough time for them to make all the decisions they need to make. So, you know, I think for them to go out and look at what they have in this timeline, I think they did a pretty good job of deciding how to go about making this a smooth transition. You just got to, you know, the devil is in the process that they're going to have to use and the people are going to have to deal with. But for us to sit here and talk about how all that's going to play out, it's not a good use of our time, I don't think. So moving forward, you know, we have to do things like, and I was making a list, but I just forgot about it. I was putting too many things on it that has to do with things like the naming of the school, how, you know, what, but there's a lot to do. If you're going to create a new school, basically at Granville Central, there's a lot of things that has to happen up there. You know, I was thinking about, you know, those kinds of things. Like, well, what are we going to name the schools? Because, I mean, the earlier you do that, the more people are going to understand whether they want to remain with us based on what we're doing, or if they decide that, you know, maybe some of us can talk some of them into doing what we think is best for our system and not what they are planning on doing. I mean, there's a lot that we need to think about and work towards. And I don't think at this point we need to tie the administration's hands on anything. A decision that this board made to make this move, and once we did that, what else are we supposed to do besides let them do it? I'm done.
Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Anderson?
Yes, I understand exactly what you're speaking of, Mr. Peace, and, you know, I know when we made that motion that we did at the last session, we did definitely say the 22-23 school year, which sort of put everybody on a, you know, okay, this is the time frame, let's see what it's going to take. But in keeping also with what you're saying, Dr. Houlihan, you know, making sure that we cover all grounds. You know, we don't want to go back, and I guess it's been done well before my turn, and say, oh, we missed something here. You know, we didn't think about something here. Now we're looking at that, and what you were speaking about with J.F. Webb and the other task force that I belong to, which is the Equity Task Force, you know, and is there going to be an impact when, you know, we know that some things are going to have to get pushed over to Webb based on the reassignment and everything. So, you know, making sure we have the big picture and put it and everything on the table, or, oh, I forgot about that. Okay, let's back up and do this again. I just want to make sure that everything is on the table, just like both of you just mentioned.
Any other comments before we move on? All right, thank you. Do you need anything else from us?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, our next item is 2.04, mask and face covering update. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Things are constantly changing in this area. Once again, we bring to you an update for face coverings. guidance has adjusted and shifted yet again, and we always want to bring you contemporary information. Ms. Lauren Curtis has worked in concert with the ABC Collaborative, as well as our local health department officials, and this evening she's bringing to you some additional layers we are recommending you peel back when the time comes to do so. So Ms. Curtis, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. McLean. Good evening, board members. It's good to see you again. This evening, first, before we begin with the recommendation, I'll just update you on some of our indicators, in particular our COVID data this evening. So as you'll see, this map is becoming familiar to us. This is the map that shows community transmission within our county. So you can see Granville County is still at high, but again, we're starting to see across the state. About a month ago, this was all red. Now we're starting to see some counties move to orange, which is substantial, so one level below that. And there's a handful of counties now that are at moderate community transmission. We don't, at this time, have any counties that are blue, which is the lowest level, but you're starting to see this map change over time, which is exciting to see. Last week, again, our numbers are continuing to decline, so you can see our data from last week. And then you can see over time, again, you can see mid-September was kind of the peak for us, beginning of the school year, and things have continued to improve. I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Smith from ABC Science, and we went over our fall data, and he commended Granville County Public Schools for the excellent job we were doing with COVID transmission within our schools. Some great numbers to report. He shared that we were in the top 20% of districts from across the nation in terms of preventing COVID spread within our schools, which was really great because that shows that the COVID mitigation strategies that we've been using this school year and last school year were really making an impact. So here's our student numbers as well. Next slide. So if you'll recall, during the last board meeting, we shared with you this information that was added not to the Strong Schools Toolkit, but to the Frequently Asked Questions document about, that was linked within Strong Schools about when should schools consider lifting their universal indoor mask requirements. And if you'll recall, at the beginning of the school year, the toolkit was updated to reflect that the recommendation was that everyone wear masks indoors, adults and students, because many of our students were unvaccinated at the time. Now more of our students are able to be vaccinated. And so there's questions about when should we begin as a district relaxing our indoor mask requirements. And so the recommendation that was in the Strong Schools Toolkit, FAQ, was to begin relaxing those requirements when community transmission levels began to decline over a sustained period. And in this case, they recommend at least 7 days. So, and when we get to moderate or low, which is again that yellow or blue as a county, for 7 consecutive days, school leaders can consider making face coverings optional for vaccinated individuals. And then when they are continuing to be at low levels for an extended period of time, we consider making optional for everyone. And it does say, as Dr. McLean shared, that things are continuing to evolve, and this guidance will be reevaluated by DHHS as the school year goes on and as more students begin to become vaccinated. Next slide. So the recommendation for action is based on conversation with ABC Science, as we shared, and with our Granville Vance Public Health Department. Those two organizations are supportive of the recommendation in the Strong Schools Toolkit FAQ. They do think, as Dr. McLean said, we've had a layered approach, right? We've had masking, distancing, ventilation changes, hand washing and hygiene, disinfecting and cleaning practices. All of those are important layers in our COVID mitigation strategy. And as I shared, it's been very successful in stopping the spread of COVID within our school, even when the spread within our community was very high. So we don't want to just rip one of those layers of mitigation out all at once. So the recommendation that's in the Strong Schools and that we present to you this evening is to kind of peel back that layer strategically as the metrics of community spread go down. So the recommendation is that we adjust the face covering policy when community spread is at moderate or low for 7 consecutive days. And that map, if you flip back, Dr. Winborn, it actually is based on a 7-day window, so it gives you the 7-day rolling average. So that would be the map that we would monitor to determine when it's been low for 7 consecutive days. So at that time, we would do the recommendation is the Granville County Public Schools do the following things. Make mask optional for vaccinated students and staff indoors. So again, that's vaccinated students and vaccinated staff indoors. That would require us to verify folks' vaccine status, verify their vaccination status, which is something that our nurses already do for all of our other required vaccinations. Make masks optional for all students and staff outdoors. So again, that recommendation that we've been following about having masks on when we're outdoors and we're closer than 6 feet was related to being at high community spread. So if we're at moderate or low, then the distance is not as important, and so we are saying at that time, if we're at moderate or low, making masks optional for all students and staff outdoors. There are some times when it's really hard to monitor students and know who's vaccinated and can have their mask off and who's unvaccinated and should be wearing their mask. So the recommendation is to require those masks during class changes, arrival, dismissal, and other transition times during the day, because it's very hard for staff to monitor if kids are in the hallway who should have their mask off or not. Continue masking indoors during high-risk activities, athletics, band, and chorus. Those recommendations come from their organizations. So the North Carolina High School Athletic Association still recommends that athletes, spectators, and anyone else at athletic events wears a mask indoors. And the International Aerosol Study that we use for our band and chorus recommendations also still continues to recommend masks and bell covers for singing and the playing of wind instruments. And then requiring all our visitors to wear masks because we do not know the vaccination status of folks that are visiting our school buildings. Of course, as you know, that number is going to go back and forth, right? We may be yellow for an extended period of time and remove our masks if we're vaccinated. However, there may be some times when it pops back up. That may happen following the holidays when people have congregated more. So if the levels rise back up, then we return to our existing mask protocols at that time. And then we would begin to count down again. Can we get to 7 days at low or moderate, and then get to the point where our vaccinated individuals could remove their mask indoors. So that is the recommendation at this time.
All right, board members, do you have questions for Ms. Curtis?
I would actually like to do you have a question? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I just kind of want to say something, if that's okay. I just feel like after 20 months, we are long past the point of preventing COVID, and now we have to live with it. Our level of knowledge regarding the virus's activity, transmission, and side effects have improved greatly, and no one in our community can claim ignorance to COVID. Therefore, everyone knows the risks and should be able to make the choice and assume the risk that is best for their situation. All school-aged kids are eligible for vaccines, and it's time to let the families make their own decisions. If anyone doesn't want to have to deal with quarantine protocols made mandatory by the CDC, then they can either mask or get vaccinated. Personally, I and my eligible family members are vaccinated and believe in the safety that that vaccine provides. And others in our community may not share that viewpoint, and it is not our job to impress our position on them, just as we would not want the same done to us. In another example, when a student chooses not to complete homework, the school is not held accountable for that student's actions. They are free to assess their own risk and accept the consequence of their actions. The same should be with masking and vaccines. So therefore, I'd like to make a motion that masks be made optional for all students, employees, and visitors, both indoors and out.
Okay, board members, you hear a motion made by Ms. LeBrec. Can you restate that one more time, please?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that masks should be made optional for all students, employees, and visitors, both indoors and out.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. LeBrec. Do we have a second? Okay, seeing none, the motion fails.
Great, so I have a secondary point to that then.
Okay.
So something else that I feel like we need to take into consideration. So there's actually a county in Kentucky, it's called Bracken County. And they have implemented something that's called Mask to Stay. And so their policy is now that if students are in contact with a positive case at school, so first of all, they're mask optional, but secondly, they have it that if students are in contact with a positive case at school, they can continue to come to school, but only if they cooperate with wearing a mask for those 10 days. The other option would be to continue quarantine at home for 10 days. It will be the student's responsibility to wear their mask properly, or they may be forced to finish the quarantine at home. Please note, if there is a positive case in your household, students must quarantine at home for 10 days. And then they have, other things that they go into. But I feel like this is definitely something that we need to take into consideration to allow masks to be optional. And that way, then we don't have to deal with, forcing kids to quarantine at home. It's a way we can keep kids in school, but also allowing optional masks.
Okay. Are you,
And I'd like to make that a motion, the mask to stay option. Yes.
I was just wanted to ask a question about how that type of policy would affect what the health department does on quarantine rules.
Yes, ma'am. So we're legally required by state statute to follow the quarantine guidance of our local health department, and that's in general statute. I'm going to forget which one.
Well, the pandemic control measures, right.
Yeah.
We do have to follow the control measures, and I don't remember, it's in 133.
But we are required to follow the quarantine guidance of our local health department. We cannot substitute our own quarantine guidance. It may be different in Kentucky. I'm not sure what their laws, but we are required to follow the local health department.
all right, so am I hearing correctly that the motion you're making is basically following that policy in that the student would do their quarantining at school with a mask on?
Correct, because basically, masks are meant to restrict the spread of germs, or through air droplets, right? So the point is that if a student could be potentially if there's a student that has COVID, the classroom is exposed. As long as they're masked, they can remain in school regardless, unless they choose to stay at home for their 10-day quarantine period.
Okay.
Yeah.
In an effort of giving you the option to make that motion, but also stay within the guidelines of what our health department does, could we ask that you submit that maybe through the attorney or the staff to the health department to see if they would be advisable to that?
Yeah,
Or amenable to
I've
that?
sent it to Dr. Winborn, actually, so
Okay.
he has that. If
To
do
Dr.
you-
who?
To Dr. Winborn.
Okay.
I have sent it to him. Do you want me to also send it to someone else?
Who, would that be the best way to get it to the health department?
Sure, because she reports to
Okay.
Dr. Winborn.
Okay, and so by doing that, it would come back to us at our next meeting, or you're okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, all right. So Dr. Winborn, if you could follow up with the health department with that, and then have that as an item that they can address at our December 6th meeting, please. Okay?
She did make a motion. Is she going to withdraw the motion?
Yeah, well, did you actually state that as a motion?
I
She
did,
did.
but that's okay,
Okay.
I can withdraw it.
You want to
I'll
withdraw
withdraw
that
it
until December?
if they need time to consult with the,
Okay, thank you for that.
On the presentation here, the COVID vaccination verification, what about medical privacy, all those issues? Could you address those?
Sure. So with regard to employees, proof of vaccination would be maintained in a separate medical record. It's not maintained in your personnel file, but the same as we already maintain employee health certificates and the other health information that we require from employees. And the EEOC has made clear that it is permissible to ask employees if they are vaccinated and ask them to provide proof. And for students, of course, we already maintain vaccination records for students.
Those are the ones that are mandatory to attend public school.
And so as far as privacy, there is no difference.
Yes, there is.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Ma'am? If students provide proof of vaccination, we would maintain it as a confidential student record, just as we do their asthma plan, their any other health information that we receive. The way this is written, if a student doesn't want to share whether they're vaccinated, then they just have to follow the rules for unvaccinated students. It's not like they would be excluded from school. So
it's entirely possible a child that's been vaccinated may still want to wear a mask. So,
that's right, and they
So,
certainly
okay.
can. And if someone is vaccinated but for some reason doesn't want to say whether they are or not, then they can just follow the rules, continue to wear a mask.
Thank you.
At the same time, though, I have an issue with the fact that, you're saying make masks optional, but if we had students that were recently exposed to COVID and have natural antibodies but aren't vaccinated in their system, like how do you, that's not fair to them.
Well, my understanding from the ABC studies and just from hearing them give presentations is that, and Lauren, and you can, Ms. Curtis, if you can sort of chime in with what you've heard, but that it's not the same level of protection, and it's very unpredictable from person to person whether they have antibodies or not, having been exposed.
What I've learned from our health partners is yes, that the length of and strength of the natural immunity varies very much from person to person. So that's why that is not one of the recommendations they make for a way to, that's why they stick with vaccination as a way to make the mask optional, because it varies from person to person.
Just look at, again, the wording there that says that the policy adjusts face covering policy when community spread is at moderate or low for 7 consecutive days. How do you come up with that 7 consecutive days?
So that's the map. Again, Dr. Renborn, if you'll go back.
Okay.
That information is publicly available on the CDC website, and so you can see this is from yesterday, is the day 7, and it goes back to Saturday, November 13th. So they calculate that on a rolling basis.
Okay, so your 7 consecutive days is not based on the district. You're looking at the whole.
At the county, so we're red right now.
Okay, so it is based on the counties, the
Yes, ma'am.
7 consecutive days.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
see. Okay.
Ms. Curtis, for a question of practicality, so once we see that that's happened, is that the superintendent has the authority to make this start rolling into place? This doesn't have to come back to us, right?
No, it would be, as the motion, or as the recommendation is written, that we would just adjust as levels change. So if the levels were down to moderate or low for 7 consecutive days, then on the next day, we would make the adjustment. And if they went back up, so if we went at for 12 days, and then we went back up to orange, then we would return to wearing masks.
Gotcha, thank you.
And then we would start our 7-day countdown. Yeah.
So the policy will still come to the board once a month, but, right, in between, the recommendation is that there be an automatic trigger built in.
Board members, other questions for Ms. Curtis or the staff? All right, this does come to you as a recommendation for action today. What would be the pleasure of the board?
Are we going to take action again on this at our monthly meeting?
So the masking policy as a whole comes back to us every month? Yes, sir. This allows them to do this in the interim between board meetings.
Oh, I didn't catch the changes.
Sir?
I didn't realize there was that was the change between now and then, but it is.
Has this been adopted anywhere else close by that we're familiar with?
I don't know.
This is pretty new guidance. I shared it with you 2 weeks ago, and it had just come out the Thursday before. I do understand one county did adopt this and but they have not had the opportunity to remove their mask yet. But it's my understanding from what I've heard that one county did adopt this as their indicator, and I suspect, as more boards begin to meet, then we may see some additional changes.
Dr. McKnight, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, do we have any data from the health department on vaccination rates for our younger kids?
Well, I did ask Dr. Guthrie that when we spoke, and she said, we were just finishing up. I think it was only day 5, but right now the numbers were low.
Okay.
I'm just concerned that we're going to start to single out kids that are going to have, like by requiring or leaving it optional for people who are vaccinated. I'm concerned that we're going to start to essentially, it's going to be obvious who is and who isn't, right? So, how are we going to potentially take care of issues that may arise between students in that kind of scenario?
I would think same bullying protocols we do for other items, I guess, would be my assumption.
We're going to do the very best we can, The goal, we're going to do the very best we can. The hope is to, again, try to get as even as we can with all of this. And because it's new, we just have no way of knowing what each classroom or each school looks like. But I do think some of the protocols with regard to any other disruption will take place here as well. Each of our schools are so different, I have to tell you. One of the things we will do in some of our professional development is to make sure this is now addressed, because we're on this uptick of things moving in the right direction. We now have to have that very conversation. So what do we do as we go through this transition? Because we know not all of our babies, especially that younger age category, is getting vaccinated at rates in other communities right now. So that's a conversation we're going to address in our professional development and deal with it just like we would any other disruption or, like you said, bullying or anything, because we're just not going to tolerate it. We just can't. But we do want to get to the place that people do get to enjoy taking that mask off if at all possible. So that's what this is an attempt to do.
All right. So again, this comes to you for action. If you don't want to move on it now, then the regular policy stays in place. This could be brought back up in December if you'd like when we discuss that masking policy.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve as presented. Let's get down to moderate so we can take these things off.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. McKnight to approve the presentation as presented. Do we have a second?
I'm going to have to second this. Leaving it as it is, which is, I think this is a little bit more in favor moving into, the next portion of this versus if we don't make a decision, it stays like it is now, which is even, more detrimental from what we know with comments from the parents. And unless someone's saying something else, this is what we have in front of us unless someone else, I don't want to go a step backwards. This is giving us more things as far as, being able to make some masks optional and whatever. It's better than what we currently have on the table. So I second.
Okay.
Unless someone else want to.
All right, so we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? All right, if you're ready to vote, Ms. Anderson,
Yes, I vote for the recommended action.
Ms. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. McKnight,
Yes.
Mr. Peace,
Yes.
Ms. LeBrecq,
No.
Dr. Houlihan.
Yes.
I vote yes, so it will be 6-1. All right. Any further items for that, Dr. McLean? Okay.
Yes, sir.
We will just continue to monitor the guidance. We understand even more new additional guidance is probably on the way.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Curtis. All right, board members, if you look at your agenda, you do have a few items there upcoming. Printed there, November 22nd, we have a strategic plan meeting. You'll get some more information related to that as we look for input on updating our strategic plan. Also, our Thanksgiving break that is coming up, and then we have our regular board meeting scheduled for December 6th, 6 p.m. here at Mary Potter. Also, remember that we put on the calendar for November 30th at 6 p.m. at South Granville. We will have the secondary schools public forum number 2. We'll be set up there at South Granville at 6 p.m. for that. And any other items, Dr. McLean, for that?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add to that November 22nd meeting, the strategic plan meeting will be at 5:30 p.m., and it is a virtual meeting. We will be inviting several task forces to that meeting. We will get that notice out tomorrow, but that will be at 5:30 p.m., and we'd like to have our task forces of parents, students, and educators to join us for that meeting.
Okay. Dr. McLean, do you have anything else?
No, sir, that's it for me tonight.
Board members, do you have anything else? All right. If not, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Who was the second there? Will you?
You have a tie.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Meeting's adjourned.